The Lakers, the team that's oftenly thought to be the most likely destination for Zach LaVine, is apparently out on the talented shooting guard. We're going to talk about what that could mean and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host here, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform that we happen to be on. With that being said, we got an update on the Zach LaVine scenario, right? Another one where it seems like the first couple of weeks to month that the Zach LaVine trade rumor and he had been set down because of the injury, things like that. We heard more and more possible suitors, the teams that Zach would be interested and open to be moved to. But it seems like over the last week or so, it's more and more teams that now we're hearing that are out on Zach LaVine, the latest being the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, the reason why this is kind of, I won't say huge news, but is kind of big is that they had been reported as the most likely destination for Zach LaVine if he is to be moved just as late as last week. So now hearing from Kurt Helin from NBC Sports, he says this: the Lakers remain the name most often mentioned around with LaVine, but sources said that the trade for him is considered unlikely. Now, this is also being paired with the fact that now we're hearing the Los Angeles Lakers are interested in Dejounte Murray, as the Atlanta Hawks have made him, Clint Capella, and many other players available. And when you kind of look at Dejounte Murray and his potential fit with the Lakers, it kind of makes more sense, especially if they're trying to include D'Angelo Russell in that type deal. Now, what we've heard is much like with the Chicago Bulls. If the Atlanta Hawks are going to move Dejounte Murray to the Los Angeles Lakers, reportedly they want Austin Rivers back in any type of deal like that. But outside of that and what the Hawks may want back, Dejounte Murray just makes kind of more sense for the Los Angeles Lakers. Much less of a contract than what Zach LaVine is. He's also under contract until the 2028 season, I believe, until he's 31 years old. So you have him under contract for much longer than what you would have Zach LaVine for. It's also a more cost-effective contract when you look at the fact that even in the last year of that deal, it's a little over $30 million, much less than the $40 million that Zach LaVine would make over most of the time on his contract. So it kind of makes sense there for the Los Angeles Lakers, much like we heard with the Philadelphia 76ers that they would be targeting that they would be targeting OG Anunoby over Zach LaVine just because of the contract is much less. You also have to look at it like trading for Dejounte Murray right now. You only have to match the $17.7 million on his contract. That contract shoots up next season to $24.7 million. And like I said, the last year of the deal, the 2027-28 season, it's $30.7 million. Like I said, much less and a longer controlled contract than Zach LaVine's. So it makes sense for the Lakers, especially when you look at pairing him potentially with Anthony Davis. Once LeBron does leave off, you then have a point guard and a big man there that you can continue to build that roster out around. So what it really means is that as we hear more and more teams kind of moving out of the Zach LaVine sweepstakes, per se, we've already heard that there aren't going to be any kind of sweepstakes for Zach LaVine. It makes sense where it is right now. Now, the biggest thing for the Chicago Bulls that they've been looking at and they're going to continue to look at it just comes down to this, is that is a team going to be desperate enough to look at and say, we can use a 22-point-per-game scorer on our team. We have the expiring contracts or the draft capital, whatever it is, to move it, but we want it to make it go now. That's the most likely scenario in which if you get a team like that that looks at that, they're going to be surveying it. But as we hear more and more teams pulling out on Zach LaVine, it really comes down to this, is that I think that this trade for Zach LaVine, it's not going to be the January 15th deadline. We may very well see, not up until the week of the trade deadline, if Zach is moved, him being moved. Now, I know some people still share doubt around Zach LaVine, and it seems more and more likely as more players become available around the league that there are more cost-effective options for team than the money on Zach LaVine. Now, some of those players still have their own issues and questions around them and impacting winning and things like that. But the money around Zach LaVine may end up being the biggest deciding factor in this. And once again, it goes back to that same question we've been talking about now for when it comes to Zach LaVine for a little while. Are the Bulls going to move him for pennies on the dollar potentially to maintain team chemistry? Or are they going to look at it and say, we need to bring Zach LaVine back. We need him playing well. And we need him to also be winning in that so that we can up his trade value. And like I said before, I kind of said this over on Locked On Bulls, one of the biggest questions in this is there even going to be enough time to realistically up Zach LaVine's trade value by the closing of this year's trade deadline? And the reason why I say that, Zach LaVine on the timeline that was originally given isn't projected to return back until around January 10th, somewhere in that. That would leave less than a month. The trade deadline is February 8th, I believe, or 9th. That would leave less than a month for the Chicago Bulls to have Zach LaVine play well enough to up his trade value to where teams would then be interested in trading for the talented shooting guard. Again, not a perfect player by any stretch of the imagination, but you'd be leaving roughly about 10 to 12 games for Zach LaVine to play well, and you still want to win because, like we talked about before, one of the scenarios that could still hurt Zach LaVine's trade value is if he comes back and he's putting up numbers, but the Bulls start losing. And so you got to play that risk versus reward. That's one of the biggest questions that the Chicago Bulls are going to have to ask themselves when it comes to the Zach LaVine trade. If they want to just try to make sure it happens at this trade deadline, they may find that the market for him just is, well, the returns for him are just not going to be at all what you could have got back at the trade deadline last year. And so it's unfortunate, man. It's really unfortunate when it comes down to that the Bulls probably should have, and of course this is hindsight, made the move for Zach LaVine at last year's trade deadline with what the New York Knicks offered. The Bulls aren't getting anything close to that type of deal or offer at any point this offseason, and I would go on to say that at all. I don't care if Zach LaVine comes back and averages 35 points from now until the end of the season. Well, that may be a bit of exaggeration. That probably would up his trade value, but when it comes down to it, you really have to. The Bulls are in a difficult situation with the Zach LaVine situation, and unfortunately, it's not a good one. It's just not a good one to be in the place where the Bulls are, where you have a player that reportedly asked for a trade, and the market for him just continually decreases, and your team is playing better. And that's the thing that they have to look at. Maybe they found something with this team in realizing how much better this team is playing. Without Zach LaVine, just overall the statistics, the numbers, everything, the individual performances, and that may be a tough question to ask for, but as of right now, we got teams that are falling out of the Zach LaVine, stop eyeing him, mentoring him, whatever it is, monitoring him is the word that I'm looking for. If I can choose my words correctly, it gets less and less every day that goes by, and unfortunately, we'll end up seeing what's going to happen with this, but let me know your guys' thoughts. I also want to end this by saying, what is the percentage that you put on it that Zach LaVine will still be a Chicago Bull after the trade deadline of this year? Let me know what the percentage it is. I want to hear that from you guys down below. Make sure I may even pick one of you guys to give something away free. So make sure you guys leave that percentage down below. It also tells me who made it to the end of the video. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you're following the show at Bull Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.